and welcome to the podcast where friends discuss environmental policies from around the planet.
Hey guys, we are back with another episode. I'm Ajwa and I'm joined here with Ala. What's up? What's new with you?
Hey girl, hey. I'm good. I'm having a fun beginning to my week. I'm just chilling. I recently got to go to I was driving around different cities in Texas, and I got to spend a lot of time outside. I went to some caves and some gardens, and that was really nice.
Well, I'm glad you had a fun weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm finally fully vaccinated.
Yay!
So I'm excited about that. So, as you guys know, we are now doing series 2. And in this series, we are doing 2-part episodes. So in this series, we're going to cover different topics as they relate to climate change and how the policies around these topics mitigate or advance the effects of climate change on people and the environment. Does helping the climate help society, or does helping the society help climate?
Whoa.
And in this 2-part episode, we're talking about textiles and the environment. Before we get into it, let's answer an audience question. So, in response to the China environmental policy episode, one of our listeners, Mike, asked if these arrests even mattered in China. Is the Chinese government putting on a show and suppressing people, or will there actually be long-lasting impact from their crackdown? So, what do you think about that, Ala?
I mean, it's different parts, right? So China is still the world's top emitter, and they produce more than a quarter of the world's annual GHGs, which contribute to climate change. But, they still signed the Paris Climate Agreements, and that counts for something. Like, their goal is for carbon neutrality is 2060. But hey, they got there before the US. And it's true, I'm not gonna lie, they've arrested environmental protesters, and it's not like China is like, sure, give me what you want, tell me your opinion. That's not their type of governing, so to speak. But a lot of the fines that we talked about on that extra policy episode, the China one, actually got paid, and a lot of the closed workshops are not allowed to reopen, and when they are, they have to be up to code first. So at least they're following through in some aspects. Another thing I think Mike brought up was, the fact that they decided not to import any more waste was an economic decision, and that's partially true, because the electronic waste alone that China has right now will be worth about 24 billion by 2030. So yeah, it was kind of economic, but even though it was mostly an economic decision, it still has helped the country's environmental position. You know what I mean? And also given leverage to maybe some countries surrounding them. It's what inspired South Korea to reevaluate their recycling programs, and it's what encouraged Singapore to stop taking in as much waste as well. So it's not all like, oh, this is just a sham. You know what I mean? But I will say, yes, it's China, so you got to take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah. No, I think that's actually a really good explanation. So I really hope that answered your question, Mike. So last week we talked about the history and the science of textile. We talked about AI and the impact and the role of fast fashion in climate change. In this episode, we will be talking about global roles and the actions that have been taken in response to the textile industry's growth. We'll talk about some of the biggest offenders and some of the biggest fixers as well. And we will talk about where we think regulations and companies' efforts are headed in the future.
Because we're a policy podcast.
So, Ala, do you want to jump in and tell us some of the impact that you have found?
Yeah, so something I recently learned about is a UN effort. Well, specifically the UNFCCC, which, if you guys remember, is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. They started this charter, the Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action, in 2018 at the 24th Conference of the Parties to the UNFCCC. And that was in Poland. It's not like a whole new type of initiative, more so something that they want signatories within the current UN climate change framework to carry out, basically. So they do say, and I'm quoting their mission right now, which is to drive the fashion industry to net zero greenhouse gas emissions no later than 2050, in line with keeping global warming below 1.5 degrees. They're also trying to target 30% of GHG emission reduction by 2030.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. And they do a lot of analyzing of the problems. And they're trying to set a decarbonization pathway that uses methods from science-based targets. So a lot of research is happening as well. And they use like a bunch of working groups. You remember how IPCC has working groups?
Yeah. So basically people who don't get money, right?
Yeah. They have working groups as well, and it's split up into all these sectors that cover things, everything from focusing on emission reductions, raw materials, energy, manufacturing, logistics, policy, using the existing tools, broader climate action, and then of course brand and retail owned emissions as well as a separate thing. It's all really split up and targeted. So they have like signatories and they have organizations. Signatories are committed to support implementation, basically, and pursuing the principles in their organizations or that they belong to, while the organizations are more committed to the core principles, but they're not necessarily in a position to implement in their organization. So there's like two steps. Something I found interesting, so according to the UNFCCC, major producers for textiles are the following places: Bangladesh, Cambodia, China, Ethiopia, Madagascar, Pakistan, and Vietnam, which I didn't know about some of these places being the top producers. But what was interesting was when I was looking through this fashion industry charter, I found that the Bangladesh Garment Manufacturers and Exporters Association, the China National Textile and Apparel Council, and the China Textile Information Center were some of the signatories on the council from these big producers. So I thought that was kind of cool.
I did not know that. That's pretty cool.
So I knew Bangladesh was a big producer, but I didn't realize, just how much. I think they're on their way to really being up there.
Bangladesh has, in the last 7 years especially, they have grown massively, so much so that now they have increased their revenue from 19 billion to 34 billion dollars. That's like a 79% rise.
That's a lot.
Yeah, and that brings it up to making it the second largest exporter of garments in the world. That sector actually accounts for 80% of Bangladesh's total export earnings.
Get out.
Yeah, and this is so in 2012, they had a fire in a factory where 1,200 workers died. So they had to introduce very strict worker regulations. And when they did that actually invited foreign companies because they were already looking to diversify. And they're like, oh my God, this is the perfect time.
Isn't that crazy? This is how we treat human existence, as basically we treat them like capital. All these people died and the government was like, we need to do better. And then other countries were like, oh, they're doing a little better? Great. Now is the time to really up production. So
the industry represents more than 45% of employment in the country, and majority of it is women. And you know how we are about that. So I support it personally.
Yeah, I love to see people employed. I just don't want them to be employed and taken advantage of.
Yeah, no, of course, I agree with you. But it is now not only the largest contributor to the country's export earnings, it is also the largest source of employment. But obviously, when you have such a massive industry, it's going to have an impact on the environment. So it generates as much as 300 metric tons of wastewater per ton of fabric. And that water obviously has a host of harmful chemicals. And then these untreated effluents that contain heavy metals, they're being released into rivers from factories. And then this obviously affects the health of people who live along these polluted rivers.
That's kind of a bummer.
Yeah. And currently the existing law in Bangladesh, it requires these factories to install an effluent treatment plan. But it really has not been effective in reducing the environmental non-compliance. So if people want to do something, they're going to continue doing it.
Even though the laws exist, maybe enforcement is an issue.
Yeah, enforcement is a real issue, and there's not even like adequate monitoring by the government. So it's not even like they don't even find out what's happening, let alone fixing it.
No, I see exactly what you mean. I just wanted to remind everyone that if you are wondering what these chemicals we're talking about are, please check out episode 7 because we did talk about a few of them, right? I think we mentioned formaldehyde being a really big problem. And there's also, of course, like brominated and chlorinated things, which you don't really want. I always wonder if the increase we're seeing in respiratory problems and cancer problems especially in developing nations, could be due to some of these things, right? Like formaldehyde is notoriously bad for your lungs, and things like the heavy metals affect your kidneys. They affect your liver.
Yeah, no, they actually have full reports about the effect that all these chemicals in your water sources, especially, also how they affect health. And I think in one of our show notes, there's a report that is for just in the US.
Yes.
It's really interesting for you guys to go take a look at it.
Yes, check out the show notes, guys. We put time into it.
Yeah, please do. So obviously, when we talk about the garment industry, we talk about textile industry, we can't not talk about India. Indian textile industry, as part of their manufacturing sector, has been one of the most important sectors to contribute towards the country's economy. It contributes 14% to the industrial production, 3% to the GDP, and 8% to their total excise revenue collection.
Wow.
And most importantly, it provides direct employment to over 35 million people in India.
That is major.
And today, the textile industry, it has been globalized, and to sustain in the global market, the overall growth of the Indian textile sector becomes really important, right?
Yeah.
But they have to be careful because the growth cannot be done at the expense of environmental degradation. So, for instance, in Tirupur, which is in the southern state of Tamil Nadu, it's really known for its garment production for global fashion brands, right? So it records something like $3.5 billion worth of exports every year.
Goddamn.
So if you take the example of Indian cotton, it's in great demand, right? Because on average, it's like the cheapest in the world market. And just this year, cotton exports are projected to go up 40% in comparison with the previous year. Cotton is a very thirsty crop, so it requires up to like 22,500 liters of water for the production of just like 1 kilogram. So roughly the quantity required to one t-shirt and one pair of jeans.
That's crazy because we discussed last time, another plug to listen to episode 7, that it takes 3,000 liters of water to make one cotton t-shirt. So you're telling me jeans are taking up this much? Thank God I don't wear so many jeans.
Same, actually. And this is where dresses are at, guys.
Yeah, more out of laziness for me than anything.
But yeah, and then when we talk about production, obviously the EU is a really big offender or participant in this. And so is China, of course. But the EU still remains it's like the second largest producer of textile and apparel, with China being the first. In fact, the value of EU's total textile and apparel production totals something like 146.2 billion euros in 2018.
Damn.
They are really big exporters and producers of textile as well. China is, of course, the top garment exporter in the world, as we all know. So, of course, there's a massive impact on that as well. But as we talked about in our extra policy mini episode about China taking environmental action, we might see some good coming out of it as they're trying to be more environmental conscious.
And you know what's interesting is you made a good point about China being more of a garment exporter than a materials exporter. I wonder if that also factors into how much they're consuming that textile material.
Yeah, in fact, when we talk about consumption, of course, the US is the largest consumer because it has the largest apparel market in the world with a worth estimated around $368 billion US.
Get out!
Yeah. Though China is on track to overtake them by 2025, I want to say. Then it'll be China. So China is the biggest producer right now, and it will soon become the biggest consumer as well.
Yeah, but China has way more people than the US. So
That's true. But it's just a culture, right? Like the consumer culture.
yeah, like you said, the consumer culture. I mean, China is producing garments as well. So yeah, people are using those garments. The US doesn't hit the list for producing or being one of the biggest producers of either textiles or garments. It's not in that list. It's not even in the top 6 or 7, but it's the number one consumer.
They love their clothes. They love their Amazons.
Yeah.
The good thing is, especially after the pandemic, which is, to be fair, technically horrible, but it kind of opens a gateway for all these countries that their textile industry had suffered. They can build back greener, right? So especially Europe with the digital recovery, feel like it can do great.
Yeah.
We talked a lot about company practices and personal responsibility when it comes to reducing the impact of the fashion industry, especially on the environment.
Yes, we did.
However, we did not get into government roles. Do you think that governments should institute policy to regulate the fashion industry, or we're good as we are?
I mean, I've learned a lot from what you've said here. I barely knew some of these things. So yeah, I think it's necessary, although, girl, you know I'm pro regulation. I just have never seen letting the market decide work in the favor of general people. I've not seen that happen anywhere. And I think that maybe the fact that we didn't realize the textile industry was a problem for so long is why we're really behind in it. Part of that problem is that when you look at who regulates what in the fashion industry at a government level, it varies, right? But it's usually some type of trade commission or import body dealing with the textiles as a commodity, which they are. So that's probably part of why we see such environmental impact, right? They're thinking more like money, and they're not thinking more the process of production, maybe. But I will say, being that the EU is, like you said, one of the biggest producers, they have started making some regulations for textiles. So the most recent is from 2011, and it was amended in 2013. What they try to have is more of like content requirements, fiber types. They're also trying to relax requirements on self-employed local producers, like smaller producers, which I think can encourage those people as well and maybe get people to buy locally, which is always good for the environment. And a really cool thing I saw is that they're identifying hazardous components, or they're requiring people who sell these things and import these things to identify those hazardous components. And I think that since the term of hazardous is always evolving, this portion could have the greatest impact as far as environmental good.
In the EU, I think the regulations are probably more, but also because they're a big producer. A lot of the current regulations that we've seen in the US, they're just like kind of protection of consumer safety, right? So maybe except for the one in California, where they have a Safe Drinking Water Act that prevents the industry from just like importing whatever material they want.
Can I just say, however, this is why you should set federal standards, because the Safe Drinking Water Act is a federal thing, and then different states can improve or specify things within them.
I think this is definitely one of the points where I think they should, because we don't see a lot of this federally. Like there's way more on pet fur labeling, by the way, federally than there is on the disposing of the garment.
That's
of the
crazy.
Garments. And I feel like there should be some origin points as well, right? Like now a lot of people like your cacao or your coffee must come from sustainable sources. I think they can implement like some of those regulations as well.
Right. That's a good point. Speaking of regulation, we know that they face some challenges here. So Aja and I did the research, and we were looking to see what experts are saying in this industry about what might the challenges be. Also based on, everything we talked about here. We think the biggest thing is a lack of legislation, right? Like Aja just pointed out, that is addressing fashion and textiles specifically. Like, yeah, we don't need like a minister of textiles or whatever, but maybe like parts of like different countries' Ministry of Interior, maybe somebody who works in like the internal affairs, maybe the people who work in commodities commissions could set out just parts of that to deal with the textiles. Also, we need more research. Like, we didn't start realizing this was a problem until the 2000s when fast fashion was like in your face. Not to mention money, our biggest problem, because money is what you need to build this infrastructure and kind of drive this regulation. If you think about recycling programs, we talked a lot about how most of the fashion that is made isn't even consumed for a long time, and then it goes to landfills, right? So I think the EPA estimated that about 11 billion clothes ended up in landfills in the US alone. So it's definitely important that we start looking at recycling programs, or at least some kind of consequences, with the way they have like emissions taxes on certain companies or producers, or like carbon pricing. That could be something to look at. They do have like these, what do they call them? These voluntary certifications for private organizations, which is pretty cool, but they're opt-in a lot of the times. And there's no like legal penalties or repercussions. It's just like people will be like, oh, you said you'll do this, but then you didn't do it. Which with social media now, like you can get a good boycott going, but still, you know what I mean? Yeah, we definitely need more like binding regulations. Things where it's not just in one country, but it's across maybe a few countries, so that it doesn't become the situation where you have all this spillover, where people are like, okay, they upped the regulations here. Well, let's pack it up and go over to another country.
A lot of Chinese companies are doing, right?
Yeah.
But hopefully we'll see some actual real change.
Yeah.
How do we combat these issues, Ala?
So I'm going to give some examples. I think Europe right now is the place for combating the environmental impact of textiles. So I focused on the examples that they're using.
Is there anything that Europe is not doing well? Like, look at their agriculture industry. Look at this. Man,
yeah. I mean, Europe isn't perfect, but it's like you said, like they're, maybe because they work as one-ish, kind of, they're constantly thinking of like, okay, we need to do this, we need to do that. At least they're working on it. They don't spend as much time arguing over should they work on it. But in 2020, in March, this is during this whole just before COVID time, the EU Commission adopted a new circular economy plan, which included a strategy for textiles. So they're trying to stimulate innovation and boost reuse, right? We love that. We love reuse.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2021, after taking all that time and planning and stuff like that, the European Parliament adopted a resolution on this new circular economy action plan, which demands additional measures to achieve like carbon neutral, sustainable, toxic free, fully circular economy by 2050. So they're tightening recycling rules and they're binding targets for material use and consumption. Remember what we said about binding regulation? This is stuff that you have to stick to, and they've put dates, which gives you a deadline. I think this plays into trying to reach some of their Paris climate goals as well. So as part of the proposals, like the members of the European Parliament, they asked for new measures as well against microfiber loss and stricter standards for water use, which is great because up to like what is worth like 50 billion plastic bottles worth of microfibers end up in our waterways every year just from textiles. So strict tightening how much you can put in there, and also we've talked about how much water we're using. I think that's better for everyone.
There's like some companies that are really under fire because they found like really like a lot of microplastics being used. One of them is Boohoo, by the way.
Oh God. There you go. This is why we need that regulation. So a really cool quote I saw from the lead MEP on the Circular Economy Action Plan from the Netherlands, Jan Hoytema. If I ruined that, I don't know what to tell you. He said, circularity principles need to be implemented through all stages of a value chain to make the circular economy a success, from design to production all the way to the consumer. Which, yes, yeah.
And it's very plausible.
Mm-hmm. It really is. I think we can do it. You just got to start small. Like, you don't have to be crazy, but you do have to start small. And now, going away from that, like, big picture whole EU, the UK is doing some fantastic things as well. They started, like, this waste prevention program for England, and it's tackling different sectors: construction, textiles, furniture, electrics, Road vehicles, packaging, plastic, single use. I fucking hate single use, bro. Like, if you're not buying something for just yourself at the store, like, don't buy a pack of individual single use Oreos so that you can make a cute TikTok video. I have beef with that woman. Moving on. Yeah, so they're trying to minimize waste by, like, you know, addressing all these areas. And I guess the goal is as well to reduce amount of emissions. The reason that they're doing this, as far as textiles, is that in the UK, purchase of clothing rose by almost 20% between 2012 and 2016. And around 921,000 tons of used textiles are disposed of in household waste each year in the UK, which is insane.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is insane.
Right. Like, that's a lot. It's not nearly as much as, like, the US, which we mentioned, but it's still a lot. So the plan kicked off in April 2021, which is very recent. And I thought it was cool that they're working with brands as well, like Marks and Spencer's and Primark, which, you know, those are kind of popular brands in the UK.
Primark. I love Primark.
I know.
Marks and Spencer is great.
I know.
But Primark is like a great place to shop.
It is. See, I know people hate on Primark and it's cheap or whatever, but, like, girl, it's cheap. So
It's hella cheap.
Yeah. In France as well, fashion is getting some more scrutiny thanks to Brune Poisson, which is I nailed that name. Which is one of the 3 secretaries of state within the Ministry of Ecological and Inclusive Transition, and unofficially they keep calling her the Minister of Fashion, which I guess, since she's tackling textiles, but I don't know how I feel about it. It's giving slight misogyny, but whatever. She's been systematically addressing, like, different forms of pollution generated by the country's fashion sector, so maybe the name is justified in some ways. But I think she's, like, pretty awesome. So we've talked about some stuff that, you know, people are doing, different countries are doing. Do you think this is going to catch on in some other countries outside Europe, Ajwa?
I think right now, since we've seen, like, this is the most noise that we are hearing about climate change in, like, a very long time.
Right.
And it is pushing for a lot of change. And quite a bit of it is feel-good change, sure, but at least there's action. And I don't think it can get worse than this, right? I really don't. So the only way is up. So, yeah, maybe I'm a fool for being optimistic about it. But I really do think that a lot of people are trying to at least make some change.
100% agree. And I think if governments can deal with some of these problems we addressed, like, maybe, like, certify textiles more. I know that there are organizations that do this. The organization we're going to talk about today actually invented something called the Higgs Index, which a lot of companies use now. It helps them measure, like, how socially and environmentally safe their products are. I think if we tackle, like, how much effluent water are you using? Use some of these standards that other countries are using, let it spread. Then yeah, we could be well on the way to at least curbing some of these problems. You know what I mean? Work with these brands. That's how I see it.
Agreed.
So that brings us to the end of this episode and our fashion saga.
Which is a hella fun. Let me just add.
It was fun. Like, I'm not a fashion girl by any means, but this was very interesting to learn about. So, like, I do want to shout out the Sustainable Apparel Coalition real quick. I think this is one of, like, the biggest fashion coalitions out there. It's a global alliance of retailers, brand suppliers, advocacy groups, labor unions, academics, all working together to create an apparel, footwear, and home textile industry that produces no unnecessary environmental harm and has a positive impact on people and communities. Because, guys, let's keep it 100. The most important thing about environments, of course, is to take care of the earth, but it's because, like, we use the earth and we interact with the earth and we want to keep people and communities safe. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So they're the ones who developed that Higgs Index, which, you know, they keep tweaking it, working on it. And it's an online tool that has members up to about 40% of the current global fashion industry. They're hoping to grow that. And that's where they can use that tool to see, like, how is our production, how is our distribution affecting social and environmental components around us. And I think that's pretty cool. Next week, we are going to jump with this whole climate and industries theme. We are going to jump into the hot topic of meat. I cannot wait.
Oh, you're very excited.
I know, I'm very excited. I'm very excited. So we're looking at the impacts of the meat industry, how we even got here, because like we consume like hella meat, guys. It's out of control. And the biggest offenders in varying regions of the world. Am I evil because I eat meat? Well, we'll find out if it's time for me to go vegetarian, never vegan, next week. So be sure to listen. It's going to be a good time.
And that will be the end of it. So you guys, we talked a lot about different policies today that are working to combat the environmental effects of textiles. Which of these do you think is the most promising, and do you think can have some real change that we will be able to see? Also, if you have questions, suggestions, or changes that you would like to see, do let us know. We are very eager to listen to you.
Always.
And that will be it. Check out our website, planetpolicypals.com, for updates and show notes, as well as references on everything we talked about today. Email us, leave a voicemail, rate and review us. Follow us on Twitter at Planet Policy Pal, Instagram at Planet Policy Pals, and like our Facebook page. And until then, keep learning, pals!